It is your good karma that has allowed you to make it here. Not everyone is destined to be here. This is a special place on this planet. If you honor the Venerable Milarepa, in one of his songs he says that if you have good karma, then you should try to get to the Holy Eagle Mountain in India. This is the best place for you to develop. Here we find ourselves in a place which is completely at odds with the modern world, is it not? There is no glamour here, but this place is very good and positive. We'll purposefully spend today here in Rajagra, or the city of Rajgir as it is called now. And when returning home you will feel the benefit of the memories of this place. But what is this place? Well, essentially what happened here was that Buddha was about 80 years old and had been teaching his disciples for 40 to 45 years. He was telling his disciples how to move forward on the path to self-development. But right here on this mountain at the end of his life, he told them about the quintessence of the path. Most people in today's society live for their own selfish motivations, and all of us here understand this, don't we? That is, most people live for themselves. So Buddha was forced to use certain concepts that were understandable to egoists, such as how they can live and be well, and how all other people could also be well, and how, as a result, society could prosper. But at the end of his life, he did something very rare. He told them the essence of the sutra of the lotus flower of the wonderful law. That is, he explained to them that Nirvana, the goal of the majority who embark on the path of Buddha or the path of self-improvement, is not the final point, and that the only correct form of life is the path of Bodhisattva, or the path of service to others. Here, on this mountain, Buddha prophesied to his disciples, all the great disciples who were around him, in what world they could achieve realization, that is, their highest status, which is to be a teacher. I will explain what I mean. If a person takes the path of self-improvement, then, after a while, he becomes a teacher to someone else. And you understand that teachers may be of different levels. If a person remains a teacher from one life to another, then at a certain stage, he will become a teacher who knows all possible paths to self-improvement. That is, he will become an expert in everything. Do you understand? He will reach an intricate perfection in any path to self-knowledge. As an example, I can tell you a story. Once Buddha and his disciples were walking through a huge forest. Buddha stopped, picked up off the ground a few fallen leaves, and asked his disciples, "What do you think? Are there more leaves in my hand or in the forest?" Then, I think it was Ananda, if I'm not mistaken, said to him, "O great teacher, of course, in your hand there are just a few leaves, but in this vast forest there is an uncountable number of leaves." Then the Buddha said, "So, dear friends, what I have managed to give you in this life is comparable to the number of leaves I hold in my hand, but what I have not taught is comparable to the amount of leaves in the forest." So, any teacher who stands on the path of self-development may come to this final stage. And these teachers are called Tathagata. And it was here that Buddha predicted to the majority of his students with whom he was walking the path of self-improvement over many lives, who will reach which level of development and on what planet, what they will be called, what students they will have, to which of their disciples, he simply called them by their names, each Buddha would leave his teaching, how long this teaching would be preserved, and how this teaching will be preserved in the form of Dharma or something similar. That is to say, there is Dharma, there is something similar to Dharma in the following period, the third period. There is the absence of Dharma. Here, Buddha predicted all these important things. And when the Buddha's disciples heard this, they just jumped for joy, because they were incredibly happy that finally Buddha had told them that they would not just sit under a tree and breathe through their noses. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was Manjusri. No, not Manjusri, maybe Shariputra. I don't remember exactly who, but one of the advanced disciples of Buddha stood up and said, "Oh Lord Buddha, we have become lazy and negligent. We thought we had already achieved realization and ceased to make efforts on our path. But now we have to continue to grow. That is, we realize that this path is huge and we will be moving in this direction for a very long time." Furthermore, in this place, Buddha made a prediction even for Devadatta, for the apostate Devadatta, who tried to kill Buddha somewhere nearby to here. Somewhere near this Gridhrakuta mountain, which Buddha was climbing with his disciples, he threw a huge stone at Buddha. But the stone did not hit him. It fell very close to him, but only hurt his leg. But Buddha treated Devadatta with great compassion. Here he predicted to him that, even after an infinite number of eons, even Devadatta would reach the state of Tathagata. He called him by the name that he would be called in a future life. I don't remember precisely what that name was. But what is most important, why I mention this, is that Buddha said, it's hard to believe, but even Devadatta will become a Tathagata. And those of you who believe in these words, keep in mind, in order for Devadatta to become Tathagata, the mind must simply change. That is, this is the devil incarnate, and even he will eventually become Tathagata. And Buddha said, if you believe me, that Devadatta will become Tathagata, then consider that you also, by all means, will come onto the path and become Tathagata. And here we have, thanks to the gods, this sutra that was brought here from the city of Vladivostok. This book is in Russian, and it is a pretty good translation. So if possible, try to find it. It is available on our website for downloading, the wonderful Dharma Lotus Sutra. Try to read it if you get the chance. Also in this book there are two important sutras, the Sutra of Meditation on the Bodhisattva Universal Virtue and the Sutra of Innumerable Meanings. Very important sutras which I highly recommend you to read. Sakyamuni Buddha was reincarnated over many lives with Shariputra and Maudgalyayana in various guises. They were also reincarnated as animals. Perhaps tonight, if we have good weather, the moon, or Chandra, will be in the heavens. Right now, Chandra is in the sky, but you won't be able to see what I'm about to tell you. If you look at the full moon at the top, maybe you will see what appears to be a jumping rabbit. If we say this is the moon, then it jumps from the top here in this way. You can see its paws sticking out forward, ears back, head, and you are supposed to be able to see it hopping. The selfless hare. This is a very important topic because, in this way, the deity Indra recorded on the moon that which the hare had done. There was a forest where 4 animals lived: a dog, Maudgalyayana, a monkey, Shariputra, an otter, Ananda, and a rabbit, Sakyamuni Buddha. And Sakyamuni Buddha taught them self-perfection. I understand how surprising this may be to you. He told them about moral things. Once a month they used to arrange Uposatha Day, as it is called in Buddhism, or in the Vedic culture, Ekadashi. And then on one Ekadashi, as usual, they gathered together. And the rabbit said to them, "Friends, try to refrain from food until the evening when the sun goes down. And on this day, dedicate your time to self-knowledge. Have you understood?" "Yes," "We have understood, teacher." And they went about their business. And as they walked to their homes, they found a meal for themselves to eat in the evening. And the hare had such determination on this day of Uposatha or Ekadashi that Indra felt, sitting in his palace, that this hare surpassed all creatures on the planets that were under his authority. So he decided to test this hare. He assumed the form of a Brahmin and descended to the hare in the forest. But before he came to the hare, he tested all his friends first. And the dog gave up his food for the Brahmin, as did the others. That is, they made a sacrifice. But eventually he came to the hare, and the hare said, "Oh, great monk, how wonderful that you came to me. I want to make a sacrifice for you too." But then the hare thought about what he would sacrifice for him, straw or what? The monk does not eat straw. And then he thought, "Okay, now I will sacrifice something that I have never done before." He said, "Monk, please kindle the fire. I'll bring you a sacrifice now." Well, the monk clapped his hands and, at once, a big bonfire was ready. The rabbit ran to one side, shook his hair, and said to those creatures that lived in his fur, "O creatures," he said, "now I'm going to jump into the fire, so run away while you have the chance, otherwise you will burn with me." Well, those who managed to run away, and those who did not, well. So he ran up to the fire and said, "Monk, now I am going to jump into the fire and burn my body, and then you will eat it, please. Would that be okay?" He said, "I want to give my body as a sacrifice to you." And the monk said, "Okay, hare." Actually, though, this was a very cool thing, of course. So the hare ran up and jumped into the fire. And as he jumped into the fire, he hung in the air over it. And he said, "Listen, monk, what's wrong with your fire? It's strange. It doesn't even burn my fur." He folded his hands in front of him and said, "Hare, you are really cool. I could not believe that this was possible, but it is possible." Indra said, "I'm sorry that I tested you." Then the hare came down from the fire and said, "Indra, how could you even think that I would be indecisive in my actions?" Then Indra took the mountain, which was not far from that place, pressed it hard, and squeezed out its essence. And, as if with a laser pointer, he drew the form of the hare on the moon. So if you read the Mahabharata, where the events took place around 5,000 years ago, these events were much, much earlier. And in the Mahabharata, you can read about the moon, that the moon is marked by the sign of the hare. It's in honor of the hare, which was the Buddha Sakyamuni. The reason I mention this is because the two other friends of Sakyamuni from this tale, Maudgalyayana and Shariputra, this was their homeland. This is Rajgir city that we have come to today. It is the homeland of Shariputra and Maudgalyayana. They were ascetics here. Shariputra was the son of a Brahmin, and in his youth he left, how should I say, to pursue self-knowledge. And Maudgalyayana was the son, he was a prince, to cut a long story short, he was the son of a king, one of the princes. And he also went to wander in order to know himself. They studied Vedic culture for many years under the guidance of a monk. And once, quite by chance, Shariputra met on the street a strange monk who did not behave like the others. He walked down the street very calmly with his begging bowl. This is the classic way of life for a monk. He has this bowl in which he collects food. He eats and practices. So, Shariputra also saw that this monk was unusual. As I described, he was walking very calmly. When he was given food, he took it. He calmly moved along. When Shariputra followed him, he waited until he, the monk, was given food, and afterwards he spoke to him. "Oh, dear monk, what route are you taking? I'd like to ask you, what is the method of self-development?" And the monk said to him, "You know, I recently became a disciple of Sakyamuni Tathagata, so I cannot explain to you the essence of the teaching. But if you go to Gridhrakuta mountain, where Tathagata stopped, you can learn from him." And Shariputra was a very clever fellow. He knew a lot. And by the way this man walked, by the physiognomy of his face, by the way he spoke, by the sound of his speech, he realized that he was very advanced. And then he almost ran to his friend, Maudgalyayana, and said, "Maudgalyayana, I met that which we have not yet seen in this life. Get ready quickly and let us go. Some ascetic came here. His name is Sakyamuni Tathagata. He surely knows that which we do not yet know." And so they ran quickly there, and when they talked to Buddha, they realized that they had found what they had been looking for their whole lives. They had met someone who had been moving towards self-development for many, many, many lives. And then a new phase began for them. They became disciples of Buddha and began to practice in this place and reached realization. If I'm not mistaken, it took Shariputra 7 days to completely remove all his impurity under the guidance of Buddha. Maudgalyayana too, but I think it took a little longer. But I could be wrong. It was, of course, very quickly, under the guidance of such a teacher. But once again, they were not moving together for their first lives. In past lives they had achieved a lot too. Therefore, in this life, as happens, a teacher reincarnates with his disciples. They reincarnate in different countries. They talk in different languages, because karma determines the place and circumstance for everyone's birth. But despite that, people meet without fail, according to their karma. The meaning is the following. When the teacher reincarnates with his disciples, they settle in different countries. It could be anywhere. The number 13 means a meeting of a teacher with his disciples. In the center is the teacher, and from the 4 cardinal points come the disciples. 3 disciples from each cardinal point. And here we have this number. 3 disciples from 4 points, plus he in the center. 13 in total, which gives us a mandala as a result, which was predicted in past lives. It manifests itself. Is that clear? Accordingly, Maudgalyayana and Shariputra met here with their teacher as was predicted. They had spent many years together. It is thought that Shariputra was even older than Sakyamuni himself. But, of course, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that it was here that the Sutra of the Lotus Flower of the Wonderful Law happened. In the 2nd chapter of the Sutra of the Lotus Flower of the Wonderful Law, it recounts that Buddha entered into meditation, a deep meditation. It describes that a very strong light emanated from between his eyebrows, such that it illuminated all of the worlds, from 10 sides into 10 directions, in this plane and in this plane. The light spread in all directions, and the monks were surprised, as they had never seen such a light, and they asked Bodhisattva Manjushri, who had seen a lot during his numerous lives. They asked, "Wow, what is it?" Manjushri said to them, "Buddha probably will tell you about the quintessence. He will talk about the law that you have never heard." In general, my friends, I do not suggest retelling the story in my own words, though, in principle, we wanted to read you a chapter of the Sutra of the Lotus Flower of the Wonderful Law, so that you could understand the difference between the generally accepted view of Buddha's teachings and what Buddha said about Nirvana here. Or rather, not even about Nirvana, but about the duration of his life. This is very important. We must understand that when Buddha was born in this world, he had forgotten everything. He was an ordinary man and was developing like everyone else. But then, when he reached enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, where we were earlier today, he remembered who he had been before he was born. So to speak, he attained enlightenment. But none of this was recorded. When Buddha was talking and teaching his disciples about Dharma, no one made any records at all. But tomorrow we'll go to Vaishal city. There was a gathering there a number of years after Buddha left this world. Monks gathered, but they did not just gather. a great confusion began. In one monastery they started to teach one thing, in another monastery another thing. And then the monks had no choice but to come together to systematize their knowledge. Ananda had heard most of Buddha's lectures and had a phenomenal memory, so he was invited to recite everything that he had heard. Therefore, in most of the sutras and jatakas that you will read, the first line is almost always, "Thus have I heard." It was in Vaishal that Ananda was sitting in a hollow tree. It is necessary to explain that they had changed space in such a way that the large group of monks became small enough to fit into this hollow tree so as to avoid being disturbed. And the hollow tree also became very big, so they could all fit inside. Over a long time, I don't remember exactly how long, Ananda recited his knowledge and they recorded everything. So they were recording, and it has been assumed that they were recording in the language of Pali. These were the first records, and also it is necessary to clarify. I'll probably tell you tomorrow. Okay, I'll tell you this today. I actually wanted to tell you this in Vaishal. Though Ananda was close to the teacher for many years, it is believed that Ananda was born on the same night that Buddha attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. Accordingly, Ananda was about 40 years old when Buddha left. And, of course, for a time he was too young, and only in his teenage years did he become a disciple of Buddha. And before that, before he became a disciple of Buddha, Buddha had another, how should I say it, assistant. Yes. But that other assistant went into such a dark state of mind that he stopped, to put it mildly, appreciating being next to Buddha. Then the monks got together and said, "Listen, this is an outrage. He's Buddha's assistant and he talks such nonsense. Let us change this assistant." They came to Buddha and said, "Buddha, let this monk go. Let him do his regular things, because he cannot perform his duties." Buddha said, "As you wish. It doesn't matter to me. I can tolerate this dodo, no problem." But he was a man who, please try to understand, lived near Buddha. He had seen the incredible abilities of Buddha, and he had heard the incredible wisdom of Buddha. But even he was in a state of darkness, do you understand? So being close to great Guruji does not necessarily mean anything. Unfortunately, you can still be, to put it mildly, a foolish man. So Ananda, even though he was with Buddha for about 40 years, until the end of his, so to speak, assistance, was still in a state of incredible distraction. A monk, who was at that time responsible for the Sangha, told Ananda, or not Ananda, he told everyone, "Friends, there is someone among us who is not worthy to be at this meeting, because he has done some inappropriate things." And for Ananda, this was a shock, because he was being turned away. He almost fainted. And then Mahakashyapa had no choice but to send him away, saying, "No, nephew, Rahula, Rahula." And so for Ananda, this was a huge shock that he had been kicked out. Mahakashyapa accused him of 3 things. First, while walking, he often trod on Buddha's clothes. That is, while following Buddha, he very often trod on his clothes, making them fall off. This was filed as the first claim. You were untidy. Secondly, he insisted that Buddha accepted women as nuns. Buddha said, "Okay, Ananda, I will accept them. But because of this, my law will remain in an unchanged form for only 1,000 years on this planet. If there had been no women, the law would have remained unchanged for 2,000 years. The third came when Buddha got sick after eating, well, poor quality food. This, again, took place in Vaishal. Buddha said, "Ananda, please bring me a drink of water." But Ananda was such a dodo that he said, "Oh, teacher, further up the river which runs through here, carts have passed, and they have stirred up the water, which is now dirty." And Buddha said to him again after a while, "Ananda, bring me a drink of water." And he told him the same thing, that the water was dirty. And after some more time, he said to him for the third time, "Please bring me some water." Ananda went and got some of this cloudy water and brought it for Buddha to drink. And Mahakashyapa said to him, "Ananda, if you threw this cup into the sky, the gods would fill it with nectar and give it back to you. But you are such a dodo, you cannot even imagine such a thing. You brought cloudy water, to put it mildly, for Buddha to drink, who was already feeling bad enough, to say the least." There was also something else that was the fourth accusation, but I don't remember what it was. So, after that, Ananda was kicked out of the meeting. Ananda left. I think it took him 4 or 6 days to recover from such a hard blow when he was kicked out. What's another way of saying kicked out? Expelled. Yes, he was expelled. It was a shock for him, but it was necessary for him to reach enlightenment, which he did. When he returned after enlightenment to Mahakashyapa, he said, "Oh, Mahakashyapa, take me back. I realized everything. I understood everything, and I think I can benefit your group." Well, then he was invited, took his place, and that's why all Jatakas begin with, "Thus have I heard," "Once upon a time the Lord was staying," etc. So, the 16th chapter of the Lotus Sutra of the Wonderful Law is called The Lifespan of the Tathagata. At that time, Buddha, addressing the Bodhisattvas, as well as to all at the great meeting, said, "Trust me, young men of good family. Believe in the Tathagata speaking a veracious word. The essence is here. Please, read for yourselves. I'm just briefly retelling the story, but don't want to waste your time. You can read the 16th chapter in about 40 minutes. Buddha told them the following, although no, let me read you a little bit. "You must listen carefully and hear of the hidden, divine, transcendental powers of the Tathagata. In all the worlds, the heavenly and human beings and asuras all believe that this Shakyamuni Buddha came from the palace of the Shakyas, sat himself in the palace of practice not far from the city of Gaya, and there attained Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, an inconceivable number of thousands of kotis of eons, never to be measured, is it since I reached superior or first enlightenment, and never ceased to teach the law. By way of example, young men of good family, let there be the atoms of earth of 50,000 myriads of kotis of worlds. Let there exist some man who takes one of those atoms of dust and then goes in an eastern direction 50,000 myriads of kotis of worlds further on, there to deposit that atom of dust. Let in this manner the man carry away from all those worlds the whole mass of earth, and in the same manner, and by the same act as supposed, deposit all those atoms in an eastern direction. Now would you think, young men of good family, that anyone should be able to imagine, weigh, count or determine the number of those worlds?" And of course they answered, "They are incalculable, O Lord. Those worlds, countless, beyond the range of thought." And then he said, "If you can imagine the number of all those worlds that the man went through, as one eon, then the number of eons that I have been on the way of self-development and teaching Dharma to others is higher than that number. But even this is not the main thing. And the fact that Buddha will be on this path many times longer than the amount of time he has already stood on it. Do you understand? Maybe this does not speak to you yet. But if you only knew how many people aspire to Nirvana and who will still tell you that Buddha went to Nirvana. Have you heard that? That Buddha went to Nirvana? Huh? But on this point, chapter 16 is very important. Yes, maybe he went for a while to Nirvana, but after a while he will again come back to this world of Sakha. This world, according to Buddhist texts, is called the world of Sakha. For some reason, in the sunny land of Yakutia, in Russia, this planet is still called Sakha. Perhaps there is some parallel here, perhaps in different galaxies, different worlds. And each Tathagata has his own area of responsibility, one might say. Namely, Sakyamuni Buddha is responsible for the world of Sakha. In other worlds, they can also be very important. In the Vimalakirti Sutra, a very important thing is described. Even Buddhas and Bodhisattvas could not believe that in our human world there is an opportunity to practice self-perfection. Do you see? There are some absolutely beautiful worlds where practicing self-perfection is wonderful. There is, for example, a beautiful world where sentient beings do not have a shape. They do not have a material body. It is much easier for them to practice self-development as they exist there as a form of scent. And their Tathagata gives to them the methodology of self-development, giving them, how should I say, the model scent, thus enabling them to change their sense to this model scent. Do you understand? And when, in this world of sense, there appeared a special envoy of Vimalakirti to ask for food, the Bodhisattvas, after hearing that there was a world called Sakha, where they beg for food to help them on their way to Dharma, were very surprised and asked their Tathagata, "Can we fly to this world and see what kind of world it is? Is it impossible?" This Tathagata said to them, "Of course you can fly, but you need to hide your scent. If people smell your scent, for them it will be too... how to explain? This much goodness will not allow them to develop properly. For them, all other smells will become stenches. But this would be wrong, because they should live and develop in these smells. Do you understand?" He meant that, in his explanation, when they appeared out of the ground, everyone was surprised, because they had become elders. And all of them bowed to Buddha. And here there is a metaphor, that there is a young man with black hair, and the elders come to him and bow and say, "He is our father." And the young man says, "These are my children." This is perhaps hard to believe, but Buddha explained that these bodhisattvas who had come to bow to him had been led by him not only in this life, but in all previous lives. That is, the totality of his disciples who, in past lives, have reached realization under his leadership. That is, that story was not only about this planet and this life, and this particular Sakyamuni Buddha. But actually, do you know many people who are well off from an economic point of view, and who make efforts towards self-development? Do you know such people? I assure you, they are not just unable to develop themselves, but they will strongly resist doing so. If a person feels good and nothing bothers him, he will not develop himself. Because for them, this is, it contradicts their worldview. The way people live, if they could only understand that the law of karma is a very rigid thing, I wouldn't simply explain to them the law of karma. I would explain to them in terms of the resources they use to live. That is, right now, slaves are working for them for two reasons. Well, very few people are actually interested in that. And there are many examples of people who have, so to speak, so-called well-being and all is well. If a person is doing well, he will not develop. And in the material world, everything is fine when there is primarily material prosperity. All is good with energy and so-called happiness. And what does happiness mean for a person? It is the possibility of regularly satisfying your passions and desires. This is called happiness. Do you all agree with me? So, a person who is burdened by so-called happiness is not really able to develop himself. This is not my opinion, it's written in the scriptures. I'm just stating a fact that is so on this planet. Deities in the heavens who have a lot of entertainment will not be doing yoga. Only the most advanced gods come to meetings and lectures and listen to what is being said. Here, by the way, on Gridhrakuta mountain, many different Brahmins have appeared. That is, Brahmins from other galaxies came here to listen to what Buddha was telling his disciples. This is very serious indeed, because the creators of the universe, of course, are geniuses. They know a lot of things, but Tathagatas know much more. Although this might sound unpleasant to some, yes. Because on different planets, these Tathagatas will have different lengths of life. Good question. After all, Tathagatas have disciples. Imagine if there was one Tathagata who will always be a Tathagata. What would his disciples do? Therefore, he must surely give way to someone else. He did his time, so to speak. Do you understand? Not him. His disciples must take his place, and he will likely go to a level where there is no time and space. Not samsara, it is much farther than that. It is thought that all Tathagata, in the absolute sense, become one. They become that which existed before zhivatmas started dividing. Because if Tathagata will always be Tathagata, no one else will have an opportunity to develop. So, one day he will leave to make room for the development of his disciples. And, on different planets, they will promote different perfect things. This is a fact. Probably Buddha never spoke on this subject. When he was asked about those things that are beyond human comprehension, he specifically said, "You do not need to ask me about this. I do not have to answer you on this topic." He was very often asked about Nirvana. "Oh, great teacher, what is Nirvana? How sweet and deep is it? How does it feel to swim there?" etc. Well, they wanted to know what they will get stuck in, so to speak, what sweet honey they will cleave to. And he said all the time, "Do not ask me about it." You should not ask. That is, there are some things that our binary mind is incapable of understanding, but in fact it is much better than any manifested form of life, which, firstly, is conditional, secondly, there are methods to change suffering, and there are ways that allow you to avoid this suffering. As for Maitreya, in another world, he and Buddha Shakyamuni were both disciples of the same Tathagata. Well, the translation of his name is "the one who enjoys luxurious houses." And he indulged in indolence in wealthy homes, ignoring what he had studied. But he was also still performing practices for the benefit of all creatures, while still indulging himself. He still stood in the end, he still chose the way of the Tathagata. Bodhisattvas have a different form. Bodhisattvas knowingly take the bitter pill and try to use it for the benefit of others. Let's suppose that we need to cross to the other side of a river, and there is a boatman who tells us, "Sit down, I'll take you." He takes us across, but he comes back. They do not stay at the other, better shore in order that they can transport others. Got that? It was the same thing in the time of Buddha Kashyapa, when Sakyamuni Buddha and Buddha Maitreya were both disciples and friends, when one dragged the other by the hair to meet Kashyapa. In another book, I read the explanation of who was dragging whom and found the following. One of them studied under the guidance of the Buddha Kashyapa, and the other strongly refused. It was the Sudra that studied from the Buddha Kashyapa, and it was the Brahmin that refused, saying, "Why should I study from this bald monk? What am I going to learn from him? I follow the call of my ancestors. I perform rituals, my prescribed duties. I don't need this bald shaman," as he called him. But at some stage, this Sudra could not stop himself and brought his friend closer to the place where Buddha Kashyapa lectured. "Let's go have a swim in the river," he said, because the river was right next to that garden. And when they had finished swimming, he took him by the hair and dragged him. And Gatikara, I think that was the Brahmin's name at that time, was stunned. He thought, "Wow, a Sudra took me, a Brahmin, by the hair?" And he said, "Listen, friend, is there a good reason that you took me by the hair? And are you dragging me to this bald shaman?" And he answered, "Of course, my friend, there is a very good reason. Let's go and listen, at least once." So he dragged him to Kashyapa. He listened and was inspired, and he really began to practice. So the one who dragged was Sakyamuni Buddha, and the one who was dragged was Buddha Maitreya. There is one theory why this, our material world, was manifested. Once there was absolute harmony, that is, all zhivatmas were in perfect harmony. There is a view that energies then started to interfere with that harmony. These energies were called tamas, rajas, and sattva, and they provided zhivatma with 3 different ways of how to live. And so zhivatma wanted to live these 3 different ways of life at the same time. So then there was a separation into 3, and then these 3 different zhivatmas also wanted to gain these experiences. So again, there was a division. It's like cell division, you know? Paths fork, fork again, and so on. And that's why we all have this variety, which we can see now. We are, in fact, all one thing. But we have variety because our zhivatmas accumulated different experiences. We have original data. We are different because of our zhivatmas. Some have a more or less good zhivatma, some a little less good, some in fact have extreme ones, and some very extreme. All this because of the fact that different actions were committed, different choices were made. Those choices were not always good ones in terms of karma. Therefore, karma leads us generally to suffer. Not exactly. Maitreya is not exactly his disciple. They are friends. That is, they move in parallel. He really will be reborn. But perhaps on this planet, Maitreya has just such a fate. Note that Maitreya will come at a time when there will be utter chaos on this planet. Volodya asked the question, if the consciousness of bodhisattvas is a single whole, beyond time and space, why do they manifest themselves in different worlds in different ways? From his point of view, which I agree with, different categories of disciple manifest different types of Tathagata, so that they were clear and understandable for every world in which they appeared. There is a certain logic to this. There is a special Tathagata who heeds. I don't remember his name. Sitting, that is, the stupa jumped, because lots and lots, an infinite number of kalpas ago, this Tathagata attained realization using the Lotus Sutra of the Wonderful Law. And when he was able to leave, he made a vow that he would not leave into this timelessness of space, time and energy. And every time when someone reads the Lotus Sutra of the Wonderful Lord to his disciples, he will manifest himself and confirm that it is indeed the correct sutra. Therefore, he will exist forever. And when any Buddha or any Tathagata reads this sutra, he appears and says, "Yes, it is so. This is the sutra." That is to say, it is his ritual. Read the scriptures of Shivaists, read the scriptures of Buddhists, and sometimes parallels can be found. Shiva is very much like a real Bodhisattva or Tathagata. The way he treats his environment, how he treats people, his tolerance, his compassion, that is, he is a normal Bodhisattva in principle. Moves very well. In the comments about the Lotus Sutra of the Wonderful Law, it is said that the great free God is Shiva, but this is only one of the opinions. Last year we went to Maratika in Nepal. Maratika is a cave where Padmasambhava got a technique from Mandarava for obtaining an indestructible body. So there, one monk said that Shiva is considered in the Buddhist classification as the protector of Dharma. That is, he is someone who stands guard, protecting the Buddha's teachings. Well, at least there is such an opinion among Buddhist monks. I want to thank you for your good karma which brought you here. You can get the good that you need in this life, and maybe even share your knowledge with others. It's very important. Here, in this sutra, it says that it is important to live for others. It is quintessential. Not for the sake of your ego, not for the sake of some short-term goal, but because it is important to be a support for other living beings. Read the sutra. Remember these places. Now I suggest we spend some time alone and really try to feel the atmosphere of this place, and then we'll gather at the bus.